So, welcome to our last webinar of 2023. Crazy that we are all here at this point. It is December, and so the topic is going to be preparing for school breaks and holidays. I am Dr. Megan Kirby. I am the Director of Dissemination and Implementation Programs for Language Dynamics Group. What my job entails is helping disseminate research and getting things into practice, such as evidence-based practices, and not just products, not just like story champs or our assessments that we have, like the cubed, all of the narrative language measures, our dynamic decoding measures, the Pearl, which is our kindergarten dyslexia and language screener, and then story champs, a bilingual version and an English only version. The bilingual is Spanish English. And then we have a new actually diagnostic tool. It's the Diamond. So it's going to be a dynamic assessment of oral language for grades 1 through 8. And that is coming out by the end of January. So if you're interested in that, you can let me know when you fill out the certificate form at the end of this webinar. And again, if you are watching this later and it's recorded, again, at the end of the webinar, you'll get a certificate link and a form that you'll fill out, and just let me know that you want more information on the Diamond. So anyway, going back to what we're going to talk about right now is going to be talking about learning loss and what we can do to prevent it for our students, right? So it's going to happen. We're going to talk about school breaks and what the big problem is and why there is a push for year-round school. I have no opinion on it. But there's a push, and there is some evidence that obviously if you pay people more though to teach in those year-round school programs and to work those long schedules, then obviously that's also going to have an effect because people are getting paid more, their quality of life is better. So there's a little bit of a like correlation between like why does it work so much? Happier teachers. I'll go over what we know works in terms of how to prevent learning loss, but specifically we'll spend most of our time with talking about how educators and therapists, which very curious what your roles are. I didn't ask that at the beginning, so feel free to put in the chat. That matters. How parents and caregivers can help, because if you want, you can share this webinar with them and the link, and there's going to be some great things that are going to be in there for them. I will open it up for discussion at the very end. And since already most of you, if not all of you, are going to be speeches or speech pathologists, that's great. So we'll talk about that. I will spend some time addressing that role. Okay, so if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Summer breaks from school. So I'm going to talk about summer breaks because right now Australia is starting their 6-week summer break. It starts in December and it ends in late January for most of the schools. And then they also get like a 2-week break around, just similar to North America, where you've got that Easter or spring break, usually in April, right? Canada, spring break, or excuse me, summer breaks are, that longer term between the grades, 8 weeks on average. And that seems like a long time. We'll get to the US, but 8 weeks on average. I didn't convert it, but the researchers I did online on the Department of Education, those sites, 63 to 85 days of summer break. So I don't know what it's like in Victoria on average, but it seems to be most provinces have their own kind of thing going on. There are schools that do year-round or what are considered to have balanced calendars, and those are only about 2% of Canadian schools. Now, Mexico, they're very similar to Australia in which they have 6-week breaks. The whole government of Mexico has already published a guide for when their schools will start in those different states. They're going to start school for the coming school year, August 28th, and then their last day will be July 16th. Or actually 2025, maybe that's this year. And then in the US, we have the longest average summer break. It's 10 weeks. It ranges from 8 weeks to 12 weeks. I can't even imagine 12 weeks off. But we do have more year-round schools than other countries. About 4% of US schools, closer to 5 right now, have definitely like where you've got summer breaks that are about 4 to 5 weeks long. So 4-week chunks. And then you've got longer intermittent breaks of like maybe 1 to 2 weeks here and there. So, but that's the average. So if you can think about this right now, we're talking about a month and a half to 2 months to more, to up to 3 months of like no like structured schooling going on, right? And so what's the big deal? Summer learning loss occurs obviously when our students don't use their academic skills over these months. We know that the more school that students miss, it places them at greater risk for not maintaining those learned skills like word reading, comprehension, unless those things are practiced frequently and meaningfully outside of school, right? They're going to be lost. And so there's kind of this general understanding in education and in that profession that yes, kids go on break and they're going to come back and they're going to know less than when they left us. So there's always this observable decline that we notice from especially in the primary grades, but in basic literacy and math skills. So the student's going to start their next year and they're going to start it behind. So then they need to reacquire those skills and knowledge, which makes the start of the year a review period way more stressful than it needs to be. And also you can think about that's less time than to teach new skills. Also, I think it's worth noting that a lot of kids rely on school for socialization. So when we've got families who live in rural areas or have smaller families where there's not a lot of language nutrition going on and not a lot of like conversations and talks and socialization, school's really where some of these kids are the only place where they get to learn to work and communicate with others who will eventually be their coworkers, right? So the more the students, one, struggle academically, and two, struggle socially, the more likely we know that they're going to be dropping out of school. So we want to prevent that. The big issue is that learning regression occurs. And the students it's going to happen. We can't 100% prevent 100% of the loss. And so what's really worrisome is that the reading achievement gap, right? So you talk about the Matthew effect, which is like the kids who have strong language, literacy skills, math, whatever, strong academic skills, they enter kindergarten or primary grade or year one, and they're doing well. They were always going to do well. But the kids who, didn't enter school with prior knowledge and background knowledge, strong language exposure, maybe parents didn't have them enrolled in, and there wasn't any structured preschool. They start off slow, and some of them, it's just like once they're exposed to like structured teaching, just teaching in general and like a structured setting, they're going to be fine. There's these groups of kids that we know that either have language disabilities or delays who are going to be at risk because they need so much more attention and they just don't get it. They will continue to struggle. And so that Matthew effect is going to be, I never looked into like why it's called Matthew. I think it was the researcher, but it's going to be just a widening gap. So as students age, these kids who are lower just never catch up, right? And so summer break just expands that gap. And when students enter the next grade, they're that much further behind. Now, there's a lot of data and cool, like interesting things in the research here, but average learning loss, when we talk about this, is 1/3 of a year's growth. That's on average, and that's across like high performers, average, gifted and talented, and some of our kids who are at risk or have language disabilities or disorders. Now, that's not to say that, that's expected, right, on average, and they do catch up. But what is most concerning is that we're looking at the younger grades. The younger grades, because they learn so much, have so much more to lose. So what they say is those who have more may have more to lose. When we looked at kids who, there's an assessment, Jekyll and then Scheffner, Hammer, and colleagues. Both of those studies looked at bilingual students, Spanish, English, who spoke Spanish primarily at home, whose families totally spoke Spanish, some English, and then in school, they were only receiving English instruction, okay? So they were looking at first graders and then also kindergartners, two different studies. Now, they looked at let's talk about the preschool one. So the preschool bilinguals, there were some kids who made great gains in English and Spanish language comprehension skills. Like they just skyrocketed. And then they went on summer break and that actually, that summer break had a negative effect on their language. Like they lost a lot of the gains that they made. They made so many. So that's another thing that we need to think about and consider. There's a correlation between like when you have a lot to learn, you have more to lose. Now, the kids, this is very interesting though. The kids whose language comprehension skills actually worsened over the first course of the year, like their first year in preschool or Head Start, which is our publicly funded preschool programs in the community. Now, we should be like worried about them. Those would be the ones that we want to look at some intervention, try to prevent them from that Matthew effect from taking place when they enter kindergarten. Now, if they were like not doing great and they never got the intervention that they needed in that first year preschool, then they went on to summer break, you would think that they would continue to get worse. But when in fact, their language comprehension skills, I mean, the summer proved a benefit to them, which is very interesting. And they needed to look into that, like why it's most likely that the way that they were being instructed, there was a less language exposure. So rather than English and Spanish, it was just English in that school setting. Whereas in the home and the community of some of these kids, it was both. Okay. And so it's all about language nutrition. We really do care about, taking a school break because we don't have a lot of time. And so we do know there's tons of reports out there. This whole thing right here is sustainability. I added that because there's tons of reports out there, especially with COVID, and we'll get to that in the next slide, and the pandemic and that response to learning loss, that people are like, oh, but great tutoring and like a lot of these really intensive programs to catch kids up that are after school or on weekends. The UN and UNICEF have this program in some of these other countries that are underfunded in education in general, in which they pay teachers and community members on Saturdays to go to training and then Sundays to do tutoring for kids, like storybook reading and all this stuff. That's expensive. So it's not necessarily sustainable. A new report came out in New York Times. There was an article about it from California. That might be one of these, or maybe not, but I might not have posted it because they basically spend about $1,000 per student in California to retrain. That's the average cost for the effects that they got to train teachers intensively, like letters training, science of reading, and then they saw significant gains from that. And so for only $1,000 per kid, which actually is not much. Like that's a drop in the bucket compared to what it could be. We've done studies with story champs, but the family activities, those take-home activities, I believe it was less than maybe like $200 or $300 per kid. It didn't really cost that much, but that was the average effect to get like a whole like standard deviation improvement in, or like a huge effect, like almost like a year's worth of Spanish vocabulary. So it was bilinguals, and then we sent home those Spanish family activities, and just doing that increased those bilingual students' Spanish or their home language vocabulary. It didn't improve their English, but that didn't get worse either. Story champs in that setting affected it. So that being said, right, we're all dealing with this now. I don't know about you, but I get on Facebook and I don't know why sometimes I read these posts. I'm in the, what I should have, science of reading, what I should have learned in college, like those groups. If you're not in them, I don't know. It's up to you whether you want to join or not. But there's a big push where folks are saying, well, these students, it's not COVID. And they're talking about their second graders. Yeah, it is. If they're talking about these year 3 or like these second grade students, it is that absolutely affected them. So students who experienced the pandemic, they were either born right before or born during the pandemic. They absolutely have less language nutrition and exposure because they had more adults around them, fewer opportunities of like more adults within their households. And maybe that was just one parent, right? And siblings. There was a lot of TV, there was a lot of computers, there was a lot of phones, a lot of technology to help occupy them because I don't know about you, but I have a job to do. It's and the burden of women leaving the workforce and caring for a child and also working. Yeah, there's a lot of screen time, but that's not a bad thing if it's educational. Now, what I do want to point out though is that those kids had nothing to do with this report here. These are students who were 9 years old last year, okay, and this is actually, I think it was like the year before. So I think they took the test in 2021, and then the exam or scores came out, I believe, this year. It could be a year off right now. I'm tired. Regardless, they were 9 when they took the exam. What's really sad is that 1 out of 3 of these 4th graders actually met proficiency or above. So 2 out of 3 students were at basic reading level, which is, let me give you this passage and please, please, please just tell me the basic WH questions and answer this multiple choice test, like, please. And what we're finding, it's not so much about decoding. Like, they're reading the passages to some extent. Some are really struggling, but they're reading the passages. They can't understand what it is they're reading. So we're really focused now, and I think more so Language Dynamics Group and Doctors Peterson and Spencer, myself, we're doing this research and finding out that it's a lack of systematic, explicit, and sequential comprehension instruction. You all may know that. You may see that already because students are being referred for speech and language pathology services when it really is a problem at core or tier 1. And so what we're finding is that if 2 out of 3 students are at basic level or below, like completely failed this reading exam, that's about, that's going to be, they drop 9 points. And if 9 points of a loss overall across all US, and it's worse in some of our racial groups, right? That 1 point is about 3 weeks of learning. Well, there you go. That's going to be like 9 weeks of learning that's just lost based on that exam. What does this mean in real world? Okay, so the effects on oral language then. These test scores, by going down, mean that a lot of 9-year-olds can demonstrate some understanding of what they're reading, like basics. So their decoding might be smaller. So they can read the words, they can recognize basic things. They can probably answer W questions about the character, right? Or how did he feel? Because those are words that can be signaled out and they can be taught that. They cannot necessarily infer what a character feels from what they've read if it's not explicitly provided. So the inferencing, which is hand in hand with comprehension, it's a metacognitive skill, is just not there. And that is exactly what we're getting at the heart of, is just, the oral language instruction is just not happening. So if you're interested, you can look up, this was from last year. It's a New York Times article. You can email me later if you can't get, and there's a paywall, I will send you a copy of it. So what works? I almost feel like I'm preaching to the choir because the people that usually attend to these are going to be speech pathologists who have way more training in language development and what oral language is and how it affects literacy than educators like myself, who I could pull out my primary textbook when my undergrad and my graduate school. Although it was many years ago, hopefully now it's changed, but it might have been like a part of a chapter in one of the classes was how does language develop and how do children develop language? And I really don't remember explicitly anything about oral language. So we know it includes vocabulary, listening, comprehension, asking, answering questions, really anything that we do that helps students speak and listen in meaningful ways is going to benefit them. So all these children that were, pandemic babies or whatever else, but have experienced this adverse childhood experience, right? Their childhood was disrupted too. So there's even some trauma. They typically would be learning language by seeing or hearing the language around them. So think about sign. The more language, the better. It's that quantity and quality of spoken, sign, print. It's storytelling, it's parents talking about their day, it's when you're driving with your kid after picking them up from daycare or the babysitters, or bringing them to preschool, right? That you are talking to them in the car or during the bus ride, your thoughts, feelings, ideas. There's something called elaborative reminiscing that has been well studied in New Zealand with Elaine Reese. I love her stuff. And she's really looked at, mothers recalling and reminiscing and then talking about prior events that both the child has experienced with them and then elaborating on that and helping kids. It's basically the beginning of storytelling. And so you can really start doing that with 3-year-olds, 2-3-year-olds. So what can we do if we're school professionals and therapists? So I'm just going to say this right here and be quite honest, and hopefully if there are parents who are watching this now or like later, we only want to work with what we can control, right? So I do a lot of coaching and consultations. As a behavior analyst, when I was a supervisor, I would have a lot of my employees be very upset when they would do all this work and then they would go into, let's say, like it was a picture exchange communication system or PECS. Okay, so they've done all this work in this training, like by the book, and it's great. The family actually was on board, which is surprising because who loves a bunch of laminated pieces of Velcro everywhere like that? They were on board, but then they go in the home and then it's hanging up on a door, right? And so they would get upset that they put all this effort into this, like almost a feeling of how dare you? Ooh, it's not about you. Obviously, for whatever reason, it wasn't as important as whatever else is going on. So when I think about the times I spent to put packets together for summer break for some of my students, and all these things that I thought were really great, yeah, I could see myself now as an adult in hindsight, which is always 2020 or better. It's just not worth the effort. I should have asked. So what we do know is that what really matters is your relationship to your clients or your students. Okay, so students who have at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive adult are more likely to respond to adversity. They're more likely to succeed and remain in school. Okay. We've got tons of other research too about that school environment also needs, you should want to come back to school after that summer break, right? You should be looking forward to it because it's not conditioned to be an immersive environment. Just like you as a related service provider, if you're a school-based SLP or clinician, something, you want to be paired with good things. Good things happen when that child is with you, right? That learner is with you. And so we do know from research on hurricanes Katrina and Rita, right? So students who had this horrible adverse childhood experiences, their schools closed, demolished usually, and then they had to be relocated and go to this new school, even though they had all of this learning loss, like schools closed, almost like the pandemic. The persistence of the losses, meaning like how long did that loss and like the gap that widens, it was a school environment that was the biggest predictor. So when students want to be somewhere, they are more likely to be motivated to be engaged, right? So that's really what is key and probably one of the biggest predictors, not the stuff that we make. Okay. So here's some ideas though, because we're all gluttons for punishment and we do actively care. So hopefully there's some things that you did not know about. If you're going to provide families with activities to use over break, make sure that you are only working on activities or giving them things that maintain skills. So they should be skills that are already mastered in the child's repertoire. There's no chance of them getting it wrong because the instructor is going to change and that's going to be a caregiver, right? So you want them to be practicing things at mastery level now so that they don't lose them. And then you have even more to work on when they come back. 2, caregivers are not teachers. Imagine if you give things that they are currently working on that they have not mastered yet, but you want to continue that practice at the instructional level. Here's what happens. The learner and their parent are going to get frustrated with each other because it is going to be difficult for the kid. The parent gets frustrated or feels like failure. And then this is just conditioned to be a really bad situation. Like that table, the kitchen table becomes paired with bad things happen. That parent or caregiver becomes a teacher, like authority figure, not like a loving, protective person. And that's in the home. So we don't want to mess with that. So that's number 1. I definitely have not done that before. Number 2, sometimes we assume the families are going to have a list of all these things to do. And I would stand to correct you. And my idea, I have a friend, Yamor Sven, who has a company called Story Llama. Okay. And what she has been studying in her dissertation projects really focuses on storybook reading in these early years with fathers, with immigrant families. We've done research where we've had to put sticky notes inside books that prompt questions. So they're common storybooks, like Is Your Mama a Llama? And you would think that reading them, that parents or caregivers could just come up with questions about the book to extend the conversation, right? Dialogic reading. No. So in this sense, what her whole goal is then to scale this intervention that works, because these sticky notes have prompts for what kind of questions to ask, right? Take the same approach when get an idea list. What are things that families or caregivers can do to work to maintain those skills over break? You don't make assumptions that they'll be creative people. Make take-home activities meaningful, right? Can you maybe have a template where if they are religious and celebrate certain holidays, especially now for Australia for your summer break, for us for this winter break in North America, can they write holiday cards at home? If you give them a template, right? Can you give them pre-stamped postcards to mail you letters at your school address during break? I would also encourage a book swap or donation swap at your site if you can. So where learners can pick out a book to take home over break that they can come back and swap out, or the next break. But things that they get to pick, because we don't want to assume that everybody has storybooks and that they go to the library and replenish them, right? So the next thing, super cool. Storyline Online. So Storyline Online is a literacy website. It's hosted by the Screen Actors Guild, that union that I think they just got back. They're on strike. So they have videos and they stream these videos of actors like Viola Davis, Terry Crews, Connie Britton from Friday Night Lights, John Lithgow, Wanda Sykes, Jennifer Gardner, Betty White. And they're all reading storybooks. And then there's images and illustrations from that storybook itself. And they're common storybooks, popular ones. There's one video I thought that was, didn't look for any more, made me so happy, but it's called Chester's Way by Kevin Henkes. And there's two actresses, Vanessa Morano and Katie Leclerc. Vanessa reads it orally, and then Katie, who's a deaf actress, signs the whole time. And then there's closed captioning. It's awesome. Check it out. Every book that's on there, there's a little button that takes you to a teacher's guide with activities specifically intended to strengthen English language learners' comprehension, vocabulary, verbal and written skills, all the things that we actively care about. It's not just like decoding, right? They also align it with the Common Core English Language Arts standards. And all of this is for free. So check it out. Speaking of free, I also love for nonfiction resources, the CKLA curricula. They have flip books and things aligned, but passages and readings and with beautiful photos, not just illustrations, but photos of like animals if you're going to use a science curricula. All right, then we get to other things. And I'm really hitting on this because it makes me super sad, but this might be the biggest impact for families to know that it is untrue. Some doctors out there are still telling families that they should only speak to their child in English. And when these parents and caregivers do not speak English fluently, that means they're like not talking to the kid at all, right? And so this just speaks to these data that we just need to tell families how important it is to help their child develop oral language. They can speak in any language. It does not matter. It's just about the quantity and quality of language that is heard, that language nutrition. Now, if you have story champs, the kit, there's all these extension activities that are prepared for you that you can send home if the children know what to do with them, right? So you have to do some pre-teaching, and I would encourage that, and also maybe a sticky note for parents to know what it is that you're sending home with them. But the Sparkle posters, if you've been using them year round, have the students like tell them to journal and keep a record, and that could be a competition thing where they can graph it and have whoever comes back with the most list of Sparkle words that they encountered over break. You can have a mini prize. You can add it to a giant running record. I'm not necessarily saying send these home, right? I'm just saying like if they already know and they've practiced and have the concept of what a Sparkle word is. Then you've got the storybook and you've got the story strip. That's super cool. And then graphic organizers where they can draw. So it at least has them generating ideas or generating text. So now for parents and caregivers, these are ideas for them. And we know if you have been a parent or are a parent, actually, you don't even need to be a parent to know this. It's hard to keep kids engaged in learning like during school, never mind over school break. So what I encourage are for families to partner so that the work isn't only on teacher or therapist who has a lot of families, but the family being motivated to partner with that child's school or therapy providers, right? Because with a little bit of planning and proactivity, they can absolutely play a huge role in preventing learning loss. So I suggest scheduling activities. On the next slide, I'll get to them. However, we all know, and I have to tell my families this, do not start something like a schedule unless you can hold your child accountable. Because it's great when you do all this work up front and then you're not going to follow through with it. And then the kid basically is like, I don't have to believe her because it's an empty threat. So you might as well not follow through it at all. It's almost like the, 5 more minutes of iPad and then it's dinner time and then like 20 minutes have gone by. So you might as well have not said that in the beginning because now you're a liar, right? Same thing goes with schedules. It's so much work up front that if you're not gonna be able to do it, don't disappoint yourself. Second thing, I always tell people, use the language natural to your home and community. Bilingualism, superpower. But anybody, like whatever language you use in your home, read, talk, sing, question, storytell, anything. We just need to promote that and be explicit and give families permission to do that. So I will start here because it is important to work on both word recognition and language comprehension skills. So to work on the word recognition strands of the reading rope, which are like decoding, phonemic awareness, how to read words, right? Have your child pick out something to read. And for shared reading, create routines for read alouds. Like, is it going to be the first thing when they're waking up? Is it going to be maybe a story during lunch hour or nap time or in the evening? Talk about the content, talk about the vocabulary, ask questions like, who is the story about? Where were they? What was happening at the beginning of the story? So that's called the setting, like what is taking place before the major events in the story happen, and where was the character? Identify the main character. Identify what the main character's problem was. How did they fix their problem? How did they feel about their problem? How did they feel when it was solved, right? And what happened at the very end, right? So we want to talk, those things are story grammar, and ask them in order of appearance in the book, which is character, setting, problem, a feeling in response to the problem usually, or maybe you have to work on inferencing, like if it's not explicit, an action, something that the character does in an attempt to solve their problem, and then did it work or not, right? And the ending and some kind of end feeling. In that order, if you're doing that with different books all the time, this is really what the schools who are working on Story Champs and those kits, it's going to mirror that, but it doesn't need to be the Story Champs intervention, right? Number 2, don't read the same book over and over, the repeated readings. What happens with our children is that they just learn to memorize the content. So it's not really like they're answering those WH questions. When you've read it more than once, they don't have the ability to answer any WH question about a book. You want multiple different types of books, different types of stories, and just be patient. So you want them to practice sounding out words and blending words, not just guessing what they are. Don't get frustrated, help. So you want this to be a good experience, to be efficient and effective, really supportive, but you do want kids to try and practice. We just don't want storybook reading to be such a horrible experience that neither you nor your child want to do that again. So I will say this too. I encourage families who have young ones. My niece right now is 3 months old, and I have her mom. Now she's super excited about it. She listens to audiobooks and podcasts. So when they go on a walk, she listens to it out loud instead of on her headphones because there's more language nutrition. There's vocabulary words that my 3-month-old niece is not going to be able to hear. Just more talking. When it's just she and her daughter at home, my sister-in-law, that's another person, right? It helps her. Independent reading. First and foremost, I always tell families, ask your child's teacher for a book list, or in general, like kind of like what books are appropriate for this child. Don't do it the last day of school, they don't have time. But a good rule of thumb, here it is. If they pick up anything, it could be a National Geographic magazine. If there are more than 5 words on that page that they cannot read, that book actually would be better spent during shared reading because the motivation is there for your child. They want to read it, but it's actually going to be better for you to support them and like, do a read aloud and then have like point to words if it's too much for them. But if they can read, and there's most of it, right? So that rule of five, then they're fine and they can go off reading, make a comfortable environment for them, encourage it to get different books more. Older students, I want them to be motivated readers, right? We want them to learn to enjoy reading and it's fun. A lot of families are a little bit cautious and think that graphic novels are comic books. And I would say no. Not that I would say they aren't. And so they're perfect for getting older students who may not be super engaged or interested in reading. They look like comic books, but just because there's not a lot of text per page, but they use really complicated and sophisticated vocabulary, what schools call tier two, complex academic language and general academic words, really sophisticated vocab, and they're in there. It's in the dialogue. The artwork is stunning and engaging and really helps make inferences and tie text to self and text to text connections, all of these things, thought provoking. So one of the books, the graphic novels, it's won a Pulitzer, it's Mouse by Art Spiegelman, and actually is an interview he did with his dad who survived the Holocaust, but it's turned into this graphic novel where humans are now animals. So tons of graphic novels that have won tons of other awards, but that is a good one. Really sad. I think it's also banned in Florida. Anyway, parents and caregivers. Here's more. Scheduling opportunities for conversations and writing. So just talking about things that interest you. Just talk. It doesn't even matter if they don't talk back. Ask kids questions about what you already know they're interested in. That will get them to talk about that because they're very egocentric, children are. Of course, it helps them build knowledge of words and the world around them. That in turn helps build successful readers. Even though they're not reading in front of you what you consider reading, they're practicing the skills of comprehension. Tell age-appropriate puns. So this right here actually helps kids, and it's a fun way to do it, but helps foster creativity, wordplay, imagination. Works on affixes, just a bunch of different polysemous words, so multiple meanings. Singing and dancing, rhyming. Rhyming actually promotes and is correlated with short-term memory and retrieval. So if you have kids with short-term memory issues, rhyming is great for that. It also develops speech, of course. Narrate what you do at home. So if you're just shopping, you're just talking aloud about what you're doing, that's also going to help. Yeah, so it seems really weird to talk to yourself, but it's not. It's not. It's all for your child. Now, storybooks, they're not necessary. So everybody kind of freaks out or they're like, oh, did you get on Dolly Parton's storybook list? Yeah, my niece is on that list and they get one they got one at the hospital 3 months ago and they're waiting for the next one. You don't need books, okay? You don't need books to support reading skills. There's a better, stronger bond with your child and you develop their language comprehension skills when you're sharing stories about your own childhood, about something that happened to you when you were young that was very similar to your child. You're talking about your day. You can even make things up, some make-believe experiences that really have never happened to you. Your kids won't know. They can't call you a liar. They weren't there, right? If you're not even good at that, you can try to tell fictional stories about anything in the setting that you're in. So imagine if you're going to do storytelling let's say it's 30 minutes at bedtime and you're in their bedroom, just look around, find an object and just tell a story about that object, that inanimate object. It's now become the main character, okay? So we also have storyboards. So if I go back to this slide over here, one of the things that Story Champs has is this story strip is what it's called, and it's this printable. Super helpful for creating storyboards, writing organizers, graphic organizers, help plan, let's create a home movie while we're over break, a podcast, create some memory book, and those are all really great opportunities to construct narratives, okay, and personal experiences, and to then take those back in school and share those. Also, last but not least, playing games, okay? So board games and card games, great, work on wonderful social communication skills, but if you're not into playing those or you don't have them, a lot of libraries, you can check those out, by the way. A lot of libraries also have, when I talk about go on an adventure, free passes to the zoo. I didn't even know this, children's museums, You just have to ask if they have any free passes. And it turns out tons of passes. Um, anyway, so board games, card games, not into it. Seek and find. So have your kid find everything in the room or grocery aisle that starts with a specific sound. Ask your child to figure out what everybody's in your family, their names would be if everybody's name started with a B, right? When you're at the dinner table or you're out at a restaurant, you're eating, you can ask for your kid to pass the salt, but instead of saying salt, you're gonna say the individual sounds like pass the salt, right? And it seems weird, but you're gonna do this as a game. So it's not just this one time and they think you're having a stroke. Don't say the word, you want them to then put those blends together and to know what word it is. This all practices these word recognition skills that are predictive of their decoding, their ability to read, okay, words. Again, just don't make these things super difficult so that the kid is tired and frustrated, which then is gonna not be so much fun for you. If your child asks to stop and change and do something else, it means it's too hard, like absolutely. You wanna keep activities short and no more than 10 minutes. So when we're talking about this, a great thing if you, and the weather is fine, if you're going outside, urban, suburban, rural area, it does not matter. You can go out and just say, we're gonna play a game where we have to like name everything that we smell. So you're going on a walk and you have to name it out loud. We're going to name, and then the next day or the next week, this just has to be once a week even. We're going to name everything we hear, right? And so it's almost like when you go on a road trip and you find states, the license plates or the plates on the cars that go with all these different states. It's just like that, okay? Where you can collect these experiences. They don't have to journal them. If you want them to write, sure, go ahead. What else is on here? I think that was it. Okay. Any other additional ideas for my speeches or my speech pathologists that are on here that you give your families? You can unmute yourself if you want to. Hey, Amy. Anybody want to share? Trying to think of like other things that I've done besides writing, journaling, podcasts. Kids love them, and video blogs or vlogs. So they can do that. I have set up in the past a Google phone number. I believe they're still free, in which the kids, if they were older, wanted to text me like any of their stories or like, hey, this is a personal story that happened to me, and they want to go ahead and record that and send me that audio recording. It does not go to my they don't know my personal phone number, but I do get it. Now that's to say that then we're working over break, but I believe we're all gluttons for punishment and we do love these kiddos. So there is that. They can also do that with maybe some grandparents or extended family members, is telling personal stories. So it would be super helpful for them to have something like this, like these printables where it's character. Sorry, we can't really see that. I should have had that blown up. Character, problem, feeling, action, ending, right? So the parts of this narrative. So whatever happened, they can process. So if something bad happened to them or they got in trouble or a sibling made them mad, also very helpful for families to have this so that when they're upset and they're just blubbering, they can process that and be able to communicate it so that they can get help from their parent. And then their parent is reinforced because they do want to know what's wrong with the kid. But then their parent is more likely to help them, right? So it's just this self-reinforcing and self-perpetuating wonderful thing that happens. More help gets asked in the future because more storytelling takes place, and then the parents keep helping them, and it's just on and on. What else? So CKLA, Storyline Online. I'm trying to remember. I feel like there was one other thing, but I can't remember right now. I will include, if I think of it, I will include it in the follow-up email for sure. Okay, so here are references, just because I threw them in there and threw them at you in case you are interested. And some of those things about the effects of summer vacation on bilingual preschoolers, long-term outcomes for student evacuees from Hurricane Katrina. That is a very sad but wonderful article, but terribly sad. And then Summer Regression, Impact of Summer on English Learners Reading Development. That came out last year. So that was a good one. I believe that's open access too. So if you were to Google that, that title, I believe it comes up and you don't have to pay for it. Okay. That brings us to the end of the webinar. I appreciate you being here, really do. Turnout was great considering it's December. And yeah, and a Wednesday or a Thursday morning. So you can scan this, that will take you to your form where you fill that out. And if you have any questions, I'm going to put in the chat right now. Let's see. Let's see if I can do it. I'll put it in the chat right now. But otherwise, feel free to reach out, tell me more things about what can be helpful, and I will add those to our ongoing email. Other than that, I will send this out to you. So thank you all so much.